Some things ages like fine wine. You can revisit them over and over again and you get presented a new hint of flavor every time. Or you just imagine it does. But it still works. It's your personal interpretation, and it is king of your world. Paintings, books, movies, TV series, people that I wish would live forever. Would have been great for us, perhaps not them. I personally wish I could have met the late surrealist painter Salvador Dali. Something tells me that he wouldn't have minded being brought back to life for another century, as long as he was assured his wonderful mustache was still intact, of course. But anyway, do you have some favorites when it comes to things that age as well? I have a few. Except for fine wine and Dali, I particularly have a modern-day creation in mind. There's this TV series I revisit time and time again. After I've binged through the seasons, I let it linger inside for a while, a couple of years, then I watch it again. Not as a ritual, but more as a longing, and as I watch it again, new aspects keep popping up, giving it more aroma, more fullness. Its characters become more tangible, their arcs more wavy and exciting, and their dialogue more memorable. I'm speaking, of course, about The Wire. What an excellent human creation. This is not an episode about The Wire, but about a sentence spoken by characters in it, who were sentenced to prison. And in prison, the character, Cuddy, who has just spent 14 long years inside, is excited, but also kind of worrisome, only having a day left, when Avon and Weebay cut in with their philosophy of serving time. It's like they say, you only do 2 days. It's the day you go in, the day you come out. First time I saw it, I immediately thought, of course, that's exactly how it is. But it has dimensions to it. Many. I didn't watch this TV series before 4 or 5 years after I myself had spent time inside. But I understood, maybe not exactly what they meant, but certainly my version of it. A double-edged kind of claustrophobia. I felt it the first day. Claustrophobia. I was going to be locked in with no other places to go, and the next day, not the very next day of course, but a day down the line, I felt claustrophobic for leaving my new home and entering the prison of society again. These are mere speculations to why I had this claustrophobic feeling the first and the last day inside. But it's weird, I didn't experience it any days in between. But the claustrophobia certainly drew a special frame between 2 points in time. And is there any limit to how far out in time this frame can be stretched? Except of course for someone ending their life inside. I want to track back a little so you don't think you're sitting here listening to someone who's done something horrible to someone, something unforgivable and unrepayable. That's not the case, although I'm sure the state would argue otherwise. I could pay back all the money I got that I was not eligible for, and I did. But the initial crime was all done in foolishness, and somewhat too easy to commit also. Surely I regret it, and some mean that I didn't deserve 2 months in prison for it. But I do not regret serving time in a low-security prison in the south of my country during the summer of 2006. It had everything. Good food, activities, a nice half-mile track around the prison you can jog around 100 times a day if you wanted to. And it started off good, until they started spraying manure all over the farmland surrounding the prison, and it became a bit of nuisance to take that smell in, round after round after round. The CEOs and the inmates were pretty cool, mostly. Whenever someone stepped out of the line with the CEOs, one time too many, they were just shipped to a prison a few counties away that had stricter rules. We never saw them again. Sometimes people who had behaved well during longer sentences in high security prisons and wasn't deemed a threat to anyone was allowed to spend their last year or so with us, watching the FIFA World Cup, smoking expensive cigarettes we bought along with snacks and magazines once a week when the local shop visited and made a small fortune out of us poor prison birds. I had a great time, most did. And bombshell news, there were also women serving in the same prison in their own section, but we could hang around with them in the daytime. So, what the heck are you complaining about, you might ask? And I'd say, I wasn't complaining. I was just thinking back to those 2 special days that really put a frame around the whole experience. The first day and the last. And I just wanted to dig a little deeper into the issue. Because phobia is fear, and fear can really become a cancer to our mind. What if that fear I felt the first day had gotten to me and I started acting tough as a mere precaution, and it quickly went down south, and I had been shipped further down south to a place not so nice with wary inmates and COs all around? The thing I'm trying to put my mind around is not actually fear. It's more what it outlines. It's what's in between. Because those 2 months, looking back at them, went faster by than you can say smorgasbord, lutefisk, or Yuletime. Yes, I love when Scandinavian words make their way into the English language. So I just had to. These 2 months went by fast, but as I said, only when looking back at them. It was like the first day, the last, and the day in the middle. To be fair, the day in the middle was like 4 days. Get up, breakfast, assignment, lunch, same assignment, dinner, TV, workout, TV, sleep, and so on. Why it was 4 days was different food and different revolving subjects of discussion with the other inmates. I'm trying to paint a picture of every other 4 days, which certainly was not completely alike, but had a tendency to be. We ate the same, we did the same things at assignment, we talked about the same things, we basically watched the same news on TV. You know how it is sometimes. Days were highlighted with a good joke or a story, or some team in the World Cup did better than expected. But mostly, it was the same old, same old. How does the brain handle this, you think? It catalogs that joke you've heard over and over again, as it has passed around the prison all day in like 20 different memory lots in your brain? Sounds like a very insufficient brain. The joke watered down and became less funny. In the end, it's just a cluster of identical words with very little spice to them. And that's how I also felt the whole prison experience itself seemed to go. It all got watered down and turned into gray matter. A small clustered up part of gray matter though. I had a fun time, surely. That is true, but it watered out over time, just like it does here out in real life, when routine gets to you. And sometimes that can sound more scary than spending time in the worst prison on earth. In a much earlier years than that of my prison experience, I had to try and find work to support my new family, and I took some jobs here and there through different temp agencies. I remember getting a week's assignment at a storage house with a bunch of other temps, and quickly found out that this could easily become a tad boring, as I saw a lot of repetitive tasks take form over only a few days. But at least I got to lift and carry stuff around, took it as exercise, and had fun chats with my fellow temps. Until one of them told me a horror story I remember to this day. Weeks before, he had been sent to an assignment at a conveyor belt at a coffee factory where he was supposed to stay for a few weeks, with possibilities for prolonging his stay. And, mind you, this was in the mid-90s. Robots hadn't been introduced so much into the factories, mainly because of their cost at the time. And it was just cheaper to have mostly little old ladies putting all the identical coffee bags into cardboard boxes. And also cheaper to have the occasional young temp who got lured into a fixed assignment at the conveyor belt from hell. Of course, they hadn't always been little old ladies. Most of them had worked there for a long time. But the way he explained the mere emptiness inside the eyes of some of the old people who worked there shook me to the very depths of my soul. In fact, he didn't have to explain it that much. The mere thought of doing the same movements for 8 hours a day, having breaks at the same time every day, looking at the same identical products, for years at end, the same day repeating over and over, and you can do no fun with it because it's not Groundhog Day. And with a conveyor belt too noisy to have any conversation with anyone, and with bosses constantly looking over your shoulder. Well, you'd need a heck of an interesting personal life outside work. Then maybe you'd save some of that spirit in your eyes. But I figured out it would have to be some alter ego nighttime heroic crime fighting kind of stuff to keep your sanity at safe levels. I had nor the training or the strength for that, so I deeply feared the temp agency one day would ask me to work at that factory, especially when I needed the money the most. But needless to say, when you're raising a family, you stick through stuff like this if it's absolutely necessary. But I decided there and then that I would rather have a hard job than a boring job. To be clear, I consider many hard jobs as being mundane jobs, but they don't have to be boring. There's a little win there, even if the job doesn't pay well. So imagine, where is the real prison actually at? We are prisoners of time. We serve time. But we don't have to be its servants. We can fill time with all sorts of stuff, or not. But let's do a thought experiment. Take a little trip down memory lane and try to remember two very different periods of time in your life when it comes to information you received through your senses. One exciting period and one boring. And firstly, in order not to offend anyone, yet I find it hard to believe I could. It is hard to fathom someone who hasn't endured a single boring period in their life, or someone opposite, who has only lived extremely boring days, every single day of their life. And remember, hardship is not the same as boredom. Struggling is tough, but it's not boring. I'm talking about someone who's satiated beyond boredom, like, well, maybe the one who's never bored. So maybe these two types are the same person then. And well, anyway, you're both excused and can move to the next video whenever it comes out. For the remainers, remember how much you experienced on that holiday, all the places you went, all the excitement, the people, the joy, the laughs. Maybe you even fell in love. Time just flew by. And maybe it just technically lasted for a week, but looking back at it, it had so much information stored into it that it felt like 3 weeks. Or if it had a love interest introduced, maybe even a lifetime. Then, remember the most boring, tedious period. Maybe it technically lasted for a whole month. Maybe you were under house arrest. Maybe you had a summer job packing books in a library, and you just hated books. It felt like it would never end. Time had never crawled any slower. You were certain there was something very wrong with space-time when it could make clock hands revolve that slow. But at the moment upon freedom, released from the time prison, you raced after your friends or went on holiday, remembered that hellscape of boredom long enough to make a joke about it, but just realized how easy it was to forget. Of course it was. It was only 2 days. The day you got in, the day you came out. Or you could trim it even more down. The moment it started and the moment it ended. But since emotions often, or perhaps always, are the gatekeepers that frames in an experience, be it fear, excitement, anger, lust, or whatever, a certain time span is required on both ends. Kind of like a tickling. Sometimes a bad tickle, sometimes a good tickle. And in between, time passes whether you remember it or not. Have an exceptional day, and remember that when time flies by in the now, it will become a whole different and more enriching story memory-wise than with time that you actually remembered went fast by. Then you remembered more time than things. So just observing time going by is mostly kind of boring. Unless, of course, you want to discuss time itself. But let's save that for another occasion, and perhaps fill our heads to the rim with everything space-time, and hope our minds don't melt like clocks in a Salvador Dali painting.